It was 2:47 in the morning, in the castle of Hormuz, latitude 26 north, when the silence of the sea was interrupted by something that the Russians, they would probably prefer that no one had noticed. A sensor operator on board the destroyer. USS Carney detected a signal that should not be there. The Russian Biznaga-class intelligence ship. Viktor Leonov transmitting data to territory. A digital intermediary. An electronic checkbook. Doing exactly what Moscow has been doing for decades. Get in where you're not cold. About 80 kilometers away. 2 ingraders. Took off with a very concrete mission. That signal had to disappear because if it continued, if in anti-ship batteries, so on the coast of Bandar Abbas, could set objectives for a group, US Naval with thousands of sailors on board. Time was pressing. The Russians knew it, and yet they continued to broadcast. What happened next? It was a lesson that will take a long time for Moscow to forget. Although publicly he will never admit it. The Growlers activated their electronic systems. 200 and intercepted the Russian link. From that moment on, Iranian screens began to display a US fleet, displaced by dinners of kilometers from its actual position. Ground operators pointed their systems at the empty water. Viktor Leonov, so proud with its passive sensors and its secret mission, had just become a disinformation channel. In something that unfortunately, the Russians do it on purpose with others. But this time it came out the other way around. The USS Carney physically positioned himself between the Russian ship and the Iranian coast, blocking the communication line, and used its fire control radar, pointing directly at the Lion. Not precisely as diplomatic courtesy. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the scenario was completely transformed. USS George H.W. Bush arrived to join USSS Gerald R. Ford and Al USS Abraham Lincoln, 3 nuclear supercarriers, operating together in the same theater. 3 steel cities floating in perfect coordination. For those who are not familiar with what that means, is the equivalent naval of someone appearing at a bar argument, with 3 boxing champions behind. The conversation changes tone immediately. The Fifth Fleet had created a network of sensors capable of covering the entire Persian Gulf. Where the United States and Israel had a total informative advantage, while Russia will operate in a complete information blackout. Although being fair to the Iranians, nor is it that its partners, Russians were being very helpful at that time. Shortly thereafter, a 22 Iranian common drone approached the naval group. Perhaps they will forget that with the electronic confusion, would have a window of opportunity. The fleshy USS ended up launching a missile, SM-6, that intercepted the aircraft at high altitude. The duty officer had 11 seconds to make the decision. I don't understand. Washington did not ask for a second opinion, simply relied on his training and the system. Aegis enacted. 11 seconds. In the meantime, the commander of the Leonov was still waiting for a response from the Kremlin to change course. Before continuing, tell me what you think about this operation. Demonstrates US naval superiority, or only increases the overall tension? Comment 1 if you think the United States dominates the sea. 2 if you think Russia can still respond. And subscribe for more military power analysis. Taking advantage of the electronic blackout generated by the Growlers, the 5 fighters, Israeli Air Force Adir, penetrated Iranian airspace, guided by information transmitted in real time from Hawkeye Eidos aircraft via the link system. 16. Headed towards targets in the mountains. The information that guided those planes did not come from a static map drawn in an office. Was a live death chain. The data began at an altitude of 500 kilometers with a satellite KH-11, passed a Hawkeye over the Gulf and ended up guiding ammunition with millimeter precision. At 3:12 a.m. on the F-35, released ammunition at GM-154. Joint standoff weapon, a glider bomb, stealth attacking from 100 kilometers away. No motor, no noise. Simply planning in silence towards its destiny. 3 subway facilities, linked to advanced missile programs. Ammunition, through the ventilation ducts, reinforced with a precision that does not leave much room for error or survival. Secondary explosions were so enormous that regional seismographs recorded a magnitude earthquake of 3,2. Russian technical advisors present at the site, according to available reports, did not have time to react. Will go, had just lost $200 million in research, hypersonic and 3 secret bases in a single night. A night that in Moscow would probably prefer to rewrite. But the story was not yet over for the winner. Leonov, his commander, in a movement that combines courage with a striking foul of information about their own situation, ordered to turn 180 degrees and advance toward the USS George H.W. Bush. The idea was to get close enough to use old passive sensors that could not be interfered with electronically, a classic bluff a game. Naval chicken that the Soviets had been practicing since the Cold War, when the world was different and the fleets of both blocs were measured in Atlantic waters. The problem is that the world has changed. Russia did not appear to receive the memo. Encountered the wall. A U.S. fast attack submarine, the USS Florida, emergedly, only 200 meters from the bow of the Russian ship. A black helmet of 170 meters, emerging from the depths, as if the ocean itself had decided to take sides. The Ohio-class Florida U.S. transports 154 Tomahawk missiles to sea. That black sail emerging from the sea is, in the naval vocabulary psychological checkmate, a single. Tomahawk can loiter on a target for hours, waiting for the order to attack. The Russian commander, he knew perfectly well what was in front of him, to ensure that the message will be absolutely clear. 2 helicopters, MH-60RC Hawk, flew over 15 meters over the Leonov Bridge by covering its antennae with spray. Alkaline salt. The message was as simple as it was forceful. In this game, you are not a player, you are a target. The Leonov turned off his engines. Total silence. The great Russian intelligence operation, prepared for days, coordinated with Iran, designed to give the batteries an advantage. Flag anti-ship. Ended in a silence as absolute as it is humiliating. Moscow invested millions in an operation that was in minutes. The underlying strategic error was to believe that the United States would respond with traditional military protocols. They were actually dealing with something completely different. A system of systems where each platform, every sensor and every other sensor, every missile and every human decision were integrated into a network operating at a speed that the manuals Russian Cold War simply do not contemplate. The decision speed was brutally uneven. A U.S. officer can assign a missile, SM-6, to a target in less than 3 seconds. The commander of the Leonov had to expect a satellite link with the Kremlin, only to ask permission to change course when Moscow the battle was over. Is what happens when a modern military structure faces a vertical that you need to check up each decision. To ensure that the attack, Israel to remain invisible until the last second. The 5th Fleet carried missiles at GM-88. Harm to growlers fixed on every Iranian coastal radar. The US pilots did not even shoot them. The only warning on Iranian screens was enough for the operators to their radars as a precaution. An off radar is an off radar. Iranian crews continued to try to understand why their systems were not working when the bombs were already impacting its facilities. Were waiting for orders that never arrived. Your communications had been annihilated by electronic interference when a submarine, Ian Gadir class, tried to leave the port. Was Laboon pitched an RUM-139, a rocket carrying a torpedo marks 54, and falls into the water miles away. After flying at almost 1,000 kilometers per hour, the submarine executed an emergency. An intelligent decision. Yes, probably the smartest taken by the Iranian side. Throughout that night, to complete the contour of the rim, 162 EESCM moves against rockets launched by speedboats of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This missile can perform a 50 J8, enough to intercept surfboard-sized objectives, moving at supersonic speed. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the murderer of Hormuz returned to silence the victor. Leonov was slowly returning to international waters, with its electronic systems probably in worse shape than when he arrived. Iranian anti-ship batteries were silent. Its Russian data bridge was shattered. The three supercarriers maintained their position. Trillions of dollars in global energy continued, flowing through the universe without the slightest interruption. For us sailors, this card was already breakfast time. There were no celebrations, no cheers. Simply turn their guard over to the next shift. The Russian movement had been discovered. The threat had been neutralized. The secret bases had been destroyed. And for the most powerful fleet in the world, all that had simply been another hole in the office. Moscow tried to move the board pieces. The Fifth Fleet simply removed the board. But while in the Gulf, Persian War was decided in seconds. Through data, radars and electronic systems on another front of the planet. The conflict continued to take a very different form. Away from the aircraft carriers and fleets, the war is also libre, against the roots that keep the armies running. Because in a prolonged conflict, the destroy logistics can be as decisive as winning a battle in the open field. And that is precisely what Ukraine looks like, be doing now, hitting the arteries that feed the military cell. Russian even thousands of kilometers from the front. Russia has tried to project to the world the image that this war has been going on for years, only with its own resources according to that narrative so carefully constructed since the Kremlin. The country would be a military power, with inexhaustible reserves of armaments and ammunition, capable of resisting indefinitely, without anyone's need is an interesting narrative. It is a pity that reality has this habit, annoyed to appear without warning. In practice, Moscow has been around for a long time, depending on the backing of several partners, and among them, North Korea has become one of the most significant supporters of the two countries united by such a special friendship that one sells to the other armament of dubious reliability, at prices that some Argentines qualify as affordable for those who sell, and much less affordable for those who pay in this context. One of the logistical routes connecting Russia with that ally has just been beaten. The incident occurred near the settlement of Sosnovka, in the Russian region of Khabarovsk, next to the Trans-Siberian, a point located more than 6,400 kilometers from Ukraine, far beyond the usual range of Ukrainian attack systems. Therefore, the reports point to an operation of sabotage of Ukrainian military intelligence, confirmed that the explosion caused a freight train to derail, interrupting for a while the transit of goods in one of the transportation corridors most important in Russia. The Trans-Siberian is not just any line. With more than 9,000 kilometers of extension, is the longest rail network in the world. Has historically been the of transportation. Russian key to both civil trade and for the movement of strategic resources. In the current context of war, this network is also used to move military equipment, ammunition and supplies. Any interruption has consequences that go much further. Of the delay of a few wagons, according to Ukrainian intelligence, was the objective of the sabotage, was precisely interrupt the transport of military material from North Korea. Since the beginning of the conflict, various international reports have documented the supply of ammunition and equipment from Pyongyang to Moscow, ballistic missiles, large quantities of ammunition, loaded containers traveling, lie from one regime to the other. Cooperation, which has intensified as the reserves. Russian weapons of Soviet origin have been dwindling, because it turns out that a war of this scale consumes ammunition at a rate that even the enormous reserves, inherited from the Soviet era, have difficulty sustaining in parallel. Another attack was recorded against railway infrastructure in the occupied region of Zaporizhzhia mode, where a partisan group from Ukraine set fire to a signal control box on a line near Melitopol. The objective was the same, interrupting the transit of trains with military equipment. For Ukraine to attack logistics is as high a priority as operations at the front. Railway lines are the column of Russian military transport, the circulatory system through which equipment flows, combustible, and ammunition to the different combat zones. Within this system, the Trans-Siberian occupies a particularly critical place. Russia has invested billions in its modernization, projecting that the transportation line more than 200 million tons of cargo per year. However, The priorities change when someone is placing you. Explosives on the roads, 6,000 kilometers from your warfront. Connection to North Korea acquires particular importance here. Journalistic investigations, international, have documented that Pyongyang has sent to Russia significant amounts of shells, with some analysis suggesting that a part remarkable of those used by Russian forces could be of North Korean origin, is a dependency that Moscow would prefer not to publicly acknowledge, given the self-sufficiency story that it cost him so much effort to maintain because of this. Interrupt these routes has become a Ukrainian strategic target, and the flow of weapons slows down the capacity. Russian to maintain high-intensity operations can be seriously compromised, and Russia knows it. Reason why it is developing alternatives. If it is between them, the construction of a bridge, road over the Tumen River, to connect directly with North Korea by reducing dependence on certain railway lines. A project that in normal times, no one in Moscow would have considered a priority. The growing weight of North Korea within Russian military cooperation also reflects a change in the balance of this relationship. Before the war, Pyongyang was considered a secondary partner. Today its role is considerably more relevant, although this support also has limits. Ammunition reserves, compatible with Soviet systems, are not infinite. Part of the shipped material presents reliability problems, according to some reports, and the economic terms of the agreement generate questions about who comes out really benefited from this exchange. Ukraine continues to focus on a strategy that included transportation networks and supply that sustain the Russian military effort. Attacks against trains, railway tracks, and fishing centers are part of an approach that seeks to weakening Russia's capacity to maintain the pace of operations at the front. The sabotage of the Trans-Siberian, more than 6,000 kilometers from the conflict, shows that in this war, there is no truly safe zone for Russian logistics. No matter how remote it may seem, in modern, so important, how to win battles is to make sure that the enemy cannot restock to release the following. And on this larger board, Ukraine is demonstrating a capacity to reach and operational creativity that their adversaries, clearly they had not calculated quite well. And now the big question remains on the table. If Ukraine succeeds in continuing, hitting the routes that fuel Russian military aggression, we are seeing hardly any sabotage mounted, or the start of an offensive capable of altering the balance of the entire war, because it is one thing to lose territory, and quite another is to lose the flow of weapons, ammunition and supplies that keeps an entire front alive. If the network starts to break, the impact can be much greater. Of what Moscow wants to admit, let us have your opinion. This will mark a real turning point. Or Russia still has room to choose from. Subscribe. Because what is coming may be even more decisive.